I'm Matt Cooper, and this is Bite Sides. Welcome to our latest edition of the AusFine Bite Sides podcast. This is a pretty momentous day because this is the first time we've actually had an icon. An icon in our podcast, our studio. Without further ado, I would like to welcome a very special guest, Mr. Barry Irvin, Chairman of Bega Cheese.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here.
Barry, thank you very much for coming in on a cold and wet and blustery Melbourne day. Very much appreciated that you would brave that weather to come out and see us out here in Mount Waverley. Before we go on too much further, I'd love to just have a really quick couple of minutes background on yourself and how you've come to be, as I mentioned, the icon word before. You've been in the industry a long, long time and pretty much seen it all, been there, done that. But maybe just take us back to the very early days of your journey, Barry, and how you came to be with Bega.
Yeah, sure, Matt. Well, I mean, I never feel like I'm an icon, mate. I kind of feel like I feel like I'm a dairy farmer just trying to get by, you know. And that's the line I sort of use. I guess I used a lot. So we're 5 generations of dairy farmers.
Bega Valley.
Bega Valley, yeah. And and I've got to admit, grew up in fairly humble circumstances, so never much money around. It's funny given the way, my life has unfolded. When I was young, I used to think the only people that went to supermarkets were rich people because we had our vegetable garden, we had our dairy, wow, and we had animals. And, might sound a little gruesome, but from the youngest of ages, I used to always wander across with my mum, and once a week she'd be collecting the eggs and the chickens would be running out. She'd grab one and hand it to me and say, "Cut its head off and gut it." I would pluck and gut the chicken, and so we lived a very, there was never much money around, and we lived a very humble life. And I guess as a kid, worked very hard because it was expected that you'll go and help milk the cows, and so. What
age were you do you think you were encouraged, I guess, by the family for you to contribute on the farm? What was common in those days?
Well, I was taught to ride a horse when I was 3 or 4.
Yeah, wow.
And I was expected to go to the dairy from about 6 or 7 on. And I think by the time I would have been sub 10 when I was expected to do a man's day's work, so it was. And, I think the funny thing about that was at the time I went, this is very hard, and this is and I'll be honest, I actually didn't know we were poor until we went to high school. Because when we went to primary school, everybody was sort of the same, and there was a little small town, and we went to the local school. But when I went to high school, people started to tell me I was poor, funny enough, and then people started to tell us what we didn't have, and not that particularly worried me, but it probably made me curious. So it was through my high school years where I sort of pursued academia with a great passion, because I thought that maybe the dairy farm wasn't my future, and that I could maybe find an easier life elsewhere, because I would observe people having things like weekends off, and having money, sure, and things like that. So those formative years, which I look back on now and say they really did form me, and they gave me sort of a view of the world that I think I would not have otherwise had, and they taught me a lot about work, So I never regret any of that stuff. I kind of go, it was good because it was how I started life.
People often talk these days about resilience, and the need for resilience. I guess when you're born into that circumstance, you learn pretty quick what resilience truly is.
Yeah. Well, you'd get up in the freezing cold and operate in fairly basic equipment to do difficult jobs, and as I said, there wasn't a lot of money, but you may do, and so I think and then you would go to school, so most kids, I don't think most kids would think about getting up at 3:30 or 4 o'clock and then going in from the dairy and trying to clean yourself up and then going to school, which was.
Were you naturally academically leaning even when you were a young kid? Did you read a lot?
I sort of was. As I said, the funny thing is I found I enjoyed school, and at primary school I found the work, relatively straightforward and easy to do. I think what happened was that, as I said, when I started to realise there was maybe other paths in life, I then made myself very academic. So I then read a lot. I guess I had a natural imagination and a natural curiosity, and probably, just thinking about it a bit, Matt, I was probably a natural optimist. So I can't ever remember feeling too disappointed about anything, and that lasts till today, where I kind of go, well, okay, these are the circumstances we're in. What are we going to do? How do we make it better, or whatever else it might be, was always the approach to life. So because the approach was sort of one of, on the one hand, acceptance, so I'd always accept where I was, and and I've used this line a lot. My mother used to always say to me, "Know your place," because she would observe that I would sort of be thinking about more things than even what they would want me to think of. And I used to always think, it is right to know your place, and you should know your place, but it's equally right, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to improve it. And so I could always find acceptance with whatever circumstance I was in, but my mind would always take me to, well, how do I improve those circumstances for either myself or others? So that, which I think is probably another way of looking at resilience. So that sort of acceptance, no bitterness, no blame, no, this shouldn't be the way this is, my circumstances should be different. Okay, well, I've always gone, yes, maybe they should be, but the only person that can change that is me. Yeah. And then, so, and I would be curious. I was very, very curious all the time.
I've got a couple of questions later, and it somewhat leads into it. So just a note just around your leadership and dealing with tough times. But we'll get there. We'll get there in due course. But so from high school and then on to uni?
No. So interestingly, from high school, so my first negotiation, Matt, was when I was in year 10. Because my father knew what age you could legally leave school, and that was 14 and 9 months. And so at 14 and 9 months, he said, I need a dairy hand, you need to leave school. And I began the negotiation, which said, I'd really like to go to year 12. What if I do all the milkings on the weekend and do this many milkings through the week? And can I still go to school? And so he agreed, but agreed on the basis that I would go to year 12 and then I would go to the farm. And so when
Sorry, just one more quick question. Just so I can get a really good visual of what milking was. So how many cows and what kind of machinery assistance was available then for milking?
It was a six-a-side, what they call a six-a-side herringbone.
Herringbone, yeah.
Narrow pit, very cold. You lit the boiler as you got there every morning, and we were milking probably 120, 130 cows. So not a huge dairy, but at the time that was a pretty average sized dairy. And so, so pretty basic equipment. And, irrigation was your shifted aluminium pipes. So you lifted and carried pipes. So there was no automated irrigation or even travelling irrigators. It was pipes. And so you just moved them. I can't remember their exact lengths, but you moved them 30 metres and reconnected them. So that was a laborious job. So heavy duty labour. Back then, there was no motorbikes. We did everything on horses, so which was all fine. But it was hard work. So 4 o'clock starts, 3:30, 4 o'clock starts.
So every week milking on a weekend, and then at evening, so you could stay at school till year 12. And then the next negotiation at year 12.
So at year 12, I thought my parents would be very proud of the result I got. They were not. As in it was, they realised that the result was entirely targeted at me then beginning my next negotiation, which was I want to leave home for a while and so I got a very quick exit from home because I got given a choice as to whether I wanted to keep my agreement and be a dairy farmer or I could leave. And so I had to make the very difficult on the spot decision to leave.
And that very uncomfortable conversation with mum and dad.
Yeah, and mum and dad were not happy. And so I don't think they thought that I would actually just. So that it was a that day thing. So got an extraordinarily good academic result, and I think I was the only person asked to leave home ever because my academic result was too good, you know, like and so that's how I ended up. So then I had a mate whose dad was a bank manager, and I went in to see my mate to see if I could stay the night there while I worked out what life might hold. And he was a very conservative man, and he said, why are you here and why do you need somewhere to stay? And I said, well, Mum and Dad aren't very happy with me, to put it mildly. And he went, why? And I still remember I showed him my result, and he looked at his son and said, "You're lazy." You know, like, and then
he's out. Thanks for that, mate.
Yeah, and then so he said to me, "Do you want a job?" And he gave me, and I said yes. So he gave me a job in the bank, and then he said, "You'll be transferred pretty much straight away because you can't stay here." And so I got transferred. And he said, "Where do you want to be transferred to?" And I said, a big branch in Sydney, because I had the thought process that I would go in the bank and then I would have choices of unis in Sydney. But the bank was extraordinarily good to me. So it was the State Bank of New South Wales, and they had these wonderful training programs. And every time I would suggest to them that I should leave now and go to uni, they would offer up a new opportunity. And I do, and to this day, and it's part of maybe the motivation of why I love to build organisations, because I think, you know, large organisations, you know, whether they're government organisations or large corporates or whatever, they can be a path for people of low means or difficult means, or to actually, you know, find their way out of those circumstances. And so that was certainly the bank for me, as it, you know, it gave me a pathway, kept teaching me and training me, and I loved working in the bank. Numbers came natural to me, and they would just give me more and more opportunity all the time. So I developed a unique set of skills, as I might say, and interestingly, probably thought that was my career, and then my father died. Interestingly, only a week or so before I was to get married to my also banker wife, and when I went back to sort of organise mum, I had a disabled sister, so it was my mum and my disabled sister. I very quickly realised there was very little limited equity in the farm. Even if I sold the farm, mum wouldn't have a house to live, wouldn't have enough money for a house. And so I told my then fiancé that I think I was going to have to be a dairy farmer for a little while, and we'd have to change plans and move to Bega. And we did. And so we moved to Bega. I suddenly had that. I always felt guilty about letting. It's funny how psychology can work, I suppose. I always felt like I had let my parents down by actually leaving. So in order to make that up to them, I used to drive every Friday night back from Sydney to Bega. I was the worst boyfriend ever. I'd take my then girlfriend, now wife, with me. She would get to spend the weekend with my mum and my disabled sister and my dad, while I would go and work on the farm to give Dad a break. And so I would do Saturday and Sunday milkings again, and trying to make it okay with my parents, and then I would leave every Sunday night. And my dad, for a fair period of time, would only talk to me to give me instructions for what was required to do on the farm. And then every Sunday afternoon he'd say to me, "When are you coming back?" And I would say, "Dad, next Friday night." And I said, and so he could not understand why I wouldn't just want to be a dairy farmer. And so anyway, so we ended up back at home. My wife initially said, "How long do you think this will be for?" And I said, I don't know, 1, 2, 20 years. And she was extraordinarily supportive. We live with my family, and then funnily enough, as I was trying to make a plan for Bega, for my dairy farm in Bega, and how I would actually get that out of the financial difficulty it was in, and I knew nothing really about Bega Co-operative Society back then, but I went in to talk to them about the fact that I thought I needed to produce more milk, and I needed to grow the business, and my involvement with them was that back then Bega Co-op had produced about 3,000 tonnes of cheese and had about a 30-year-old cheese plant, and they were talking about the fact that they needed to raise capital to to improve the cheese plant. And I went, well, I'm not a very good dairy farmer, but I do know a fair bit about banking, and that's how I got involved with Bega, and that's sort of where the journey started, I suppose.
Was that more as an advisory role at that time, or did you immediately become
they pretty quickly when I start, I think, and look,
when you get sure you could raise money?
I think they look, and in truth, it's a bit hard for me. It's always been a bit hard for me to tell. I think on the one hand, they liked the look of my skills, and they were sort of a bit surprised that I could sort out the finances as quick as I did, and then sort out raising the money. And I think they probably thought, look, we think we better employ this guy because otherwise he might be trouble, on the
other side.
On the other side. So I think,
bring him in the tent.
I think that they would probably not say that. They would probably say, oh, look, we just saw his skills and we thought he'd be valuable to the business. But I kind of think they weren't sure about me, and so they thought best to get him close and we'll see what
get
he
him
can
inside
do.
the tent, whizzing out, as opposed to the other way, right?
So, and of course, I was entirely. At the time, I was entirely innocent. I was literally trying to get by, Matt. Like, I was literally trying to make it. And my wife, who I'm forever grateful for, she was a banker as well. She came back and got a job as a teller, which was because that was the job that was available in Bega, and it was her income that sort of paid for the groceries and looked after the extended family, and it was me just.
So what year was that?
That would have been the late 80s. That was. So I wasn't back very long before I was involved in Bega.
Okay.
I was so I think I got first involved with Bega in '89.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that coincides with the forming of Ozfine, and it's somewhat, I would think, the first time you would have had some level of engagement with Ozfine is maybe not back. Was maybe not back in the 80s, but through the 90s and 2000s through Don, Chris's father.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't suggest that we've grown in parallels. You guys are much larger than us, but somewhat of a similar pathway in the sense of the growth trajectory. So those early days, 3,000 tons of cheese. Yeah. Lagoon Street, or was that the Lagoon Street factory?
Yeah.
And then obviously it's grown significantly since then. What do you think? So if I was an outside observer, and I am somewhat as not being in the processor world, but Bega's growth and success has been counter to a lot of experiences and other processes in the industry. A lot have gone by the wayside and consolidation, etc. What do you think Bega has done differently through the last 30 years that others didn't?
Look, this might sound a bit strange, Matt, but I think, and I still try and make sure it stays this way, I think we're always humble enough to try and learn from others, and humble enough to try and always say, we're better together and we're better to work together. And so I've always celebrated everybody's success, big or small. Obviously like being successful myself, but I've never ever felt like, my success should come at the expense of somebody else. So I think the cultural attitude from me was always see what you can learn, make sure you've got lots of relationships, including lots of relationships with your competitors. And so in those early days, without using a religious metaphor, I was happy to gather up the crumbs from off the table. I was happy to do the work that nobody else would do. So, we used to sort of call ourselves the second-hand rose, where we would go and find equipment and say, well, that we can't afford new, we'll just buy second-hand and we'll find a way to get by and we'll fund it. So to a certain extent, maybe that sort of grinding dairy farmer culture where you make do with what you can, I always say to people, have good manners, make other people comfortable. Don't be concerned, and I say this a lot, don't be concerned about sharing either your dreams or your fears. So I can remember when the industry was deregulating, and I had then been given the leadership of the company, I went around to all my competitors, much larger than me, many of them non-existent anymore, and said, look, this is what I think I can do with Bega. And they would all look at me and they would all, almost to a person, say, Barry, you're a nice fella and everything, and I know you've scheduled this meeting at the end of the day so we can go and have a beer, and that's all fine. But you realise we're going to crush you. You realise you don't have any reason to exist. And I would go, oh, yeah. And then I would say, look, this is what I hope I can do, but also this is what I'm worried about. And they would look at me even more astounded because they go, why are you telling us about the weaknesses in your business? I mean, well,
that vulnerability.
Yeah, thought you could help me. And they would always look at me and go, we're your competitor. Why would we help you? And I go, well, I thought there might be things we could do together. And inevitably, and I absolutely believe this, if you've got to believe in human nature. If you are willing enough to actually share what you dream of in a business and share what you fear or what you think might stop you, most people want to help you, even your competitors. They even subconsciously want to help you. I often travel to places where people go, you shouldn't travel there. But I believe I pick up every hitchhiker I drive past. I stop by the side of the road if somebody's broken down. I'll hitchhike myself. It never worries me because I always have this belief that fundamentally 99% of the world do not want to hurt you. They want to help you. And the funny thing is, even with my competitors, after I told them all my problems and what I might want to do, I'd always make sure I caught up with another beer with them 2 or 3 weeks or a month later, and they'd almost always inevitably say, look, I've been thinking about what you said. I shouldn't tell you this, but if it was me, this is what I'd do. And quite often it was, well, do you really want to do that piece of work? So early on, which was, obviously a big historic relationship with Fonterra, early on it was about saying, we can do this work for you, we can do it better, faster. So I always had this service provider. Just be humble enough, be a service provider, take whatever margin you can find, but keep just taking the next step forward. And I think that was maybe the difference than some of the others that, as I said, really wanted to lecture and had more of a born to rule type approach,
Funny you say that. And I can probably say this now because as we've mentioned, a lot of these companies are no longer with us. They're either in another form or they've dropped by the wayside altogether. But I was always surprised by the level of arrogance that we encountered through the industry and the dismissive nature of many in the industry, which is sad.
Yeah, it is.
Because we would always approach it in the same way, the collaborative thing of this is an idea, but how, what can we do together to take advantage of this opportunity that we've seen? And it was always the stiff arm, we don't need you, particularly in the role like ours, being an intermediary, right? Yeah. Like it's very easy to, we don't need you. You're not bringing anything to the table. Whereas I'm always not trying to blow up your ties in this forum, but you were never like that, and Bega as a partner were never like that either. It was like, come in, let's talk about it. Maybe there is something there, which was very appreciated, but definitely not the norm. No.
Well, the funny thing is, Matt, twice, and I've never actually said this anywhere else. Twice in those early days, I was offered by two, I won't name them, but people can probably nearly guess, two very large players in the industry at the time. Both came and said, we don't think you're worth anything, but we'll give you $10 million, and if you don't accept it, we'll crush you. Yeah. And I went, no, not going to accept that. Funny enough, I bought both of them. and in
the most humblest possible way, of course.
Exactly. So it was never a motivation, but I've got to admit that every so often I go, well, that was a bit of fun. Yeah.
You are allowed a little bit, a few of those moments to go,
that's right.
I know, that little mic drop moment. Yeah. No, it's super interesting, and I did want to get to the point, and probably is a nice lead into it, to the current state of the dairy industry in Australia. Yeah. And I think that a part of that aforementioned arrogance has led us to where we are today as a group. As collective, but I wouldn't describe our industry as a collective. No. We are very fragmented with a lot of different interests pulling in different directions, which is part of the problem, I feel, and a lack of cohesion and shared vision is my, I would agree. Is my opinion. So we are continue to go backwards on milk production as a standout issue that we're facing. but just a fragmented lack of trust between dairy farmers, processors, government agencies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you see the future? Well, I know it's a massive question. Maybe I'll backtrack a little bit and just say your take on the current situation of where we're at, and then where we're potentially heading, and then maybe even your thoughts around that trust component.
So look, I agree, Matt. It's fragmented and there's a lack of trust, which saddens me greatly, because it's not the way I came through the industry. The industry used to be a very united industry, and I think there were challenges post deregulation, but they were in my mind able to be managed. I think, quite frankly, the clawbacks, so promises made and not kept, and then the clawbacks that occurred in 2016, I think it was, from Fonterra and Murray Goulburn, just blew up.
It broke.
So it was under pressure and it broke, and then it all of a sudden became adversarial, and so for me, I've always tried to. So we've grown, as you say, we've grown through that period, and I've always tried to say that sort of behaviour won't be our behaviour, and we still and I think that's what's helped us grow, and I think we still have a fairly loyal supplier base to us, so we have continued to grow even though the industry has shrunk, but I do lament the that loss of trust. I think there'll be a number of factors, and this may seem strange. So the Australian dairy industry is tough, right? So I look at it and go, probably one of the toughest industries in the world. If you can, that old sort of saying, if you can make it here, you can probably nearly make it anywhere, I agree. Because it's a right through the supply chain, it's a low margin business that requires high investment.
Yes.
So it requires red hot strategy, because you're making investment decisions that are 10, 20, 30 years, whether you're a processor or whether you're a farmer. You're buying a farm, or you're building a big dairy, or putting in a big irrigation system,
big money.
Or you're building a big factory, and it's all big money and it's all low margin.
Yep.
And but interestingly, I sort of see as and maybe I'm the optimist, but I keep seeing global demand for dairy continue to improve.
Yeah.
I keep saying that the circumstances for producing dairy in Australia are actually quite good, despite the volatility of the weather, and even the processing circumstances, except for things like energy costs, are okay. The efficiency opportunities that are emerging, particularly through technology, that will occur on farm, are continuing to occur in processing as we make more and more investments, for example, in our sites, will ultimately yield for us. But you've got to have that confidence and vision to say, I'm going to make key investments, and I think as they do yield, and you do see more reliable profitability coming in that entire supply chain, on farm and in processes, I think you ultimately will see the industry start to come back together, because confidence will come back. So what really hurt the business? Well, what hurts any business? No confidence. So as soon as there's a drop in confidence, that's the thing that stops investment. So people don't take the 5-year, 10-year, 15-year bet, and then it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It does.
And I think that's been the challenge for the Australian dairy industry for a while. On farm, it's interesting. I do see on farm as a bit too speed. So I have a collective of farmers that are investing and growing like Topsy, and using technology and gaining efficiencies, and they're growing and they're doing really well. The reason why you're seeing flat or even slightly deteriorating production is we've seen it grow in the last two years, and probably would have grown again this year had it not been for the drought in Western Victoria. But I think what's happening is you're seeing those guys that are growing are not yet outpacing the people that are retiring and leaving. And when we try and assess the retiring and leaving, I think there is those that had their confidence so been that they decided not to pursue succession, or indeed we compete against other agricultural commodities, and beef has been very strong. So it's rather dairy farmers find it very easy to be a beef farmer.
Yep.
So it's very, so
the transition's
simple, and the skills they've got make them very, very, very good beef farmers.
Yeah. And
so we are seeing a bit of change as the value of beef has run ahead of the value of dairy. But I think that will again rebalance. And I would feel more concerned, Matt, if I wasn't seeing anybody growing.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of people grow. I'm just seeing that it's at the moment it's not quite keeping pace with those that have just decided to retire.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you. I think the future is actually really bright.
Yeah.
Everything we're seeing in our markets, in our customers, both in Asia and particularly in the US, and what we're seeing is a growing demand over there for more what we would consider to be our stock standard dairy products, being grass-fed primarily, but seen as a natural, better alternative in the US and North America. And so the opportunities are big, in my opinion, and I do think the profitability will catch up as that demand sucks through and the price gap improves over cost of production. To me, I still just lament the lack of cohesion in the industry.
I agree.
And that there is that optimistic view that then permeates through the industry, but also a united, I'm going to say industry again, I know I've used that word a lot, but everyone rowing in the same direction. Now, you might still be competitors, but you can still talk to each other and you can still lead the vision for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, as you say, when that trust was broken,
something broke.
Something really broke, and as you say, there's a cohesive, clear, shared view of the opportunity, and then consistently communicating that opportunity. It just doesn't happen anymore, So I might communicate, and I think it is because the trust was broken, and that's interestingly causes people to not want to talk to one another because the trouble is
the trust is broken.
The initial conversation is not comfortable.
Yep.
But I think I always think that the way in which I try and lead is to go, I will try and set an example and hope that others will eventually say that example seems to work, and I think we will slowly get there. And as I say, I don't think the path should have been as hard, and the disruption should have occurred in the way it has occurred. But unfortunately, it has, and so therefore, we just move forward from there.
Couple more questions. I'm mindful of the time. I'm very mindful of your time.
That's fine,
Barry.
It's fine.
Just on leadership, you mentioned it a couple of times, and I know that it's very dear to your heart as far as your own leadership and the way you lead from the front. When you think you've gone through so many different iterations of Bega as it's grown, we've got a lot of Vegemite stuff around us at the moment, and branding, which is an amazing story, and I'd love to get to that shortly. But there's going to be some times where you're a little shaky. Where no doubt there were times when the pathway forward wasn't as clear, and a lot of people were looking to you to provide leadership. So just leadership in general, when you maybe have doubts of your own, and how you then still portray a level of confidence and optimism to everyone around you, even though maybe internally, and that might not be the case. You mentioned earlier that you're the eternal optimist, so this might not be the case. But how do you approach leadership when things probably aren't going as well, but you still need to lead? Yeah.
So I've only had 2 EAs, one for 15 years and one for 16 years, but they always say to me they both say, the strange thing about you is that you get upset and irritated by small things, and the bigger the problem, the calmer you get.
My dad was the same. Lose his nana over something really minor, but Armageddon, he was Mr. Cool, calm and collected.
So I think there's two things, and they occurred naturally, and they occur across all the organisations I'm involved with. And I actually didn't even realise for a while, Matt, if you like, that I do set very clear standards. So, whether it's on the farm or whether it's at Bega or whether it's at the charity we created, Giant Steps, or even the new project we've got around circularity. Everybody's really clear that I like high standards. Like I don't like the farm to be messy. The factories should always look like you are happy for anybody to come and see them, and we should have really high standards in the way we deal with customers, suppliers, whatever it might be. And so because I set those standards, but then say you must treat people well, my endeavour in life, and to go back to my mum, she would always say you must have good manners. But then she would go on to explain what good manners are. And it's not what knife and fork you use or whatever else. It is about making the person opposite you comfortable. So I'd go, okay, so our standard is that we finish the job. We don't leave something half done. We make sure that we are, happy for anybody to come and have a look at what we're doing and be proud of it, no matter in what organisation. We make sure we make everybody comfortable. And that means that people work to that standard. And then the people that work to that standard know that I will absolutely back them. So they know that I will stand in front of the bus. So I always think that a burden or not, and I don't even know why, but I have this sense of responsibility that for anything that I can't readily let go. So if I'm responsible for a person, they know that I will always be that. I'll sometimes have a difficult discussion with them or something like that, but they'll know that I feel that level of responsibility, which means I'll stand in front of the bus. And so when it's not going well, I do get calm, and then I do go, it'll be me. We've just come off a round of supplier meetings, and Western Victoria's a drought. I think, of the large dairy companies, the only one that sent its leader out there. And I wasn't sent. I went. I said, the field service team needs support. We set the price, not the field service team. I will stand in front of them, and I say to them, if you want to complain, please complain to me. It's me that did it.
And did you get many?
Most of the meetings were very, very good, and where they were a little bit difficult, it was clear that people were just under deep stress, and that's the other thing. I kind of go, it's really important to understand the other person, because sometimes people are just stressed and they're upset, and they see you as a person that they would wish to help them more, and in circumstances such as drought, that whatever number you put out there is not going to
it's not going
to be enough. But it doesn't mean you don't go, and it doesn't mean that you don't stand there and let them tell you their circumstances. So
that is leadership, standing up when
and so we're, as you say, sometimes I can remember in the very early years being on the phone to our bank with our CFO on New Year's Eve, saying, I know.
It's either Christmas.
I know
Christmas
we can't
Eve
make payroll. Well, I know we can't make payroll, but you need to just give me an advance so I can make payroll.
Yeah.
And what are we going to do? And I go, we're going to talk to them. That's what we're going to do. And anyway, we made payroll.
We got through it. We made payroll.
Yeah.
Okay. Mate, again, I am mindful of your time. Sure. I just got two more questions.
Sure.
The first one is about Vegemite and your expansion beyond the world of dairy as Bega into Bega Dairy, into Bega Foods, or Bega Cheese into Bega Foods. Did you feel, was that a very strategic decision? You mentioned how hard dairy was earlier in the conversation, and the margins are very tight. Was it a deliberate strategic move to move beyond dairy and explore other areas where potentially the margin pressure wasn't as great, or was it just this opportunity came up and let's grab it?
Well, it was a bit of a dual strategy, Matt. So the Vegemite transaction took a long time. It's just that people didn't know about it,
Sure.
And so we were working on it for a long time. It partly came out of the fact that we had bought an asset from Kraft, and we had a long-term supply agreement with them, and then Kraft was splitting into Kraft and Mondelez, and we had really good relationships in that organisation, and we had multi-tiered relationships as well. In terms of our business, we were very much a B2B operation, so we were commodities or we were service providers at a B2B level. And if I was concerned about where we sat competitively, it was that I thought the branded companies were eventually going to get the better of us, and we could, and we, because we were exposed to commodity ups and downs, and we were competing against dairy companies that had brands. But I mean, it's interesting. I would have said we didn't have a core skill in brands, and and you can try and create them. There's always a risk when you buy and you buy big. That the retailers might decide to put a bit of pressure on you, or you if you lose a listing. So there was a genuine thing to say, we need to start to transform this company from a commodity B2B business, which will still always be part of what we do, but into a more branded business. If you're going to start to transform into a brand, what brand in Australia would you buy? Now, people used to say beer brands, but we can see even in the beer markets that's not the case so good
anymore.
But you'd buy Vegemite.
Yeah,
you'd buy Vegemite because you know that it's got an absolute loyalty. You can be pretty reliant on the margin you'll get. You know that it has to be on every supermarket shelf, and so it was an absolute thing to go. If we're going to start a transformation into brands, what would it be? It'd be Vegemite.
It's not a bad brand to start with, right?
And look, and in fairness, I think it transformed the way the market looked at the company.
Yep.
So suddenly, because we had obviously listed by then and became, and I think the market started to go, gee, these guys are serious.
Yeah.
And they now own an Australian icon, and we've, of course, then gone on to buy more Australian iconic brands. But I think the first one was important, and it was important that it wouldn't fail, because if it failed, the market would have viewed it the other way, saying those sorts of businesses can't transform themselves into branded. So there was a genuine strategic thought about, if you're taking that step change, how do you take it, what brand, and indeed it was removed from dairy, so it could help us, against a volatile cycle, and it's obviously done all those things for us.
Yeah, fantastic. We are nearly done, but I do have one more question,
Sure.
and it is more a personal question, I guess. Your health battles over recent times. I had the fortunate opportunity to kind of sit with you for a bit, and whilst the topic wasn't great, hearing the way you tackled your health battles was pretty amazing and inspirational. But through that dark time, when you came out the other side, was there? Did you look at life differently? And what was the life lesson that you took away from that period?
It's funny, Matt. The life lesson was probably go to the doctor. Like it was. Because people have looked at me and said, well, you were actually told you had 3 months to live.
Yeah.
You were told that you wouldn't make it, and that the percentage chance of living was really low. That must have been extraordinarily traumatic, and it must cause you to reflect on life differently. If I was honest, every time they tell me, I just wouldn't believe them. I would just look at them thinking that
That eternal optimist
they can't
again.
be right. You must
that's for other people.
You must mean somebody else. Sure. And I think that actually did help a little bit. I wasn't in denial. I've always been somebody that goes, you have to have all the information. But once I had all the information, okay, I've got all the information. So as an aside, in the entire time that I was unwell, so obviously significant surgery, significant chemotherapy that went for 9 months, and brutal chemotherapy, I never so much as Googled cancer or Googled chemotherapy. I went, got good people that know what they do, that have spent their life working on this. I will execute what they tell me to execute, and that'll give me the best chance. And so I just had this absolute, and probably in most things, I go, what do I really do? I get really smart people around me who are subject matter specialists who give me very good advice. I'm curious, so I ask them lots of questions. I realise they know more about their subject than I do. And then I go, okay, I've got all the information I need. My job is to lead the team to execute, and they'll execute for me. So my big thing about, how do you build great companies or great organisations? Well, you don't. You build great people, and they build them for you. And that's the way. And so, funny enough, that's how I approach cancer. So my life lesson when I got to the end was, everybody said, "What have you changed?" And I went, I buy more expensive wine. And so I know it sounds terrible. I know I should actually be saying, well, I always loved my family. I always gave them time. I always, sometimes it'd be pressured, but I always sort of made sure that they always felt supported. I've always loved them. My friends have always loved the people I've worked with. I've always loved socialising and having a glass of wine or whatever else. And I actually, sometimes I say, I can't have been that unhappy with my life because after that traumatic event happened, I just went back to my life.
Yeah.
I didn't actually want to change my life,
Yeah.
which makes me feel very fortunate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mate, that will come to the end. Again, thank you very much for your time today. It's been amazing to sit here for nearly an hour or so and hear your life journey and life story, and also the Bega journey, which is pretty incredible. And to think that a lot of it comes back to just staying humble and curious is a wonderful lesson for everyone, including myself. I could sit here for honestly all day because I'm sure we've just touched the surface on so many different topics and aspects. But thank you very much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Delighted to be here, Matt. And, and I guess the one thing I didn't say that, I fundamentally believe in loyalty and relationships, and that relationship that we've had for so long with Ozfine and Don and Chris and Sarah and yourself, I'd go, that's also how you build strong foundations that keep taking you forward. So I always love our relationship with Ozfine. So thank you very much.
Likewise. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.